There was a time, long before spreadsheets and stock tickers, when wealth meant survival and debt meant death. But as centuries passed, we learned to dress danger in sophistication. The simple became complex, and the foolish was renamed strategy. What was once a moral warning became a financial instrument, and the old fear of owing was replaced by a new arrogance of optimization. I have watched this cycle unfold across generations, the eternal play of pride against mathematics. Every age births a new kind of cleverness, a new generation certain it has finally outsmarted the laws of numbers. They call it innovation, progress, financial engineering. But beneath the glittering words lies the same ancient illusion: that arithmetic can be persuaded, that risk can be domesticated, that the human will can bend the laws of compounding to its favor. People love to believe they are smarter than the system, especially when the system is invisible. They borrow not only money, but belief. Belief in their own cleverness, belief in perpetual growth, belief that this time will be different. They speak of leverage as if it were wisdom. They confuse bravery with recklessness and call their impatience ambition. I've seen bright minds, educated souls, men and women of power and status, all certain that intelligence would protect them from arithmetic. But arithmetic does not care. It is the purest force in existence, immune to ego, indifferent to charm. It has no sympathy, no mercy, no interest in your potential. It simply is. And yet, pride keeps whispering. It tells the ambitious that debt is not danger, but opportunity. It promises that numbers can be conquered with strategy, that statistics can be seduced by genius. And so, they borrow, not because they must, but because they can. They borrow to amplify, to accelerate, to prove mastery over time itself. They call it leverage. I call it self-delusion wearing a suit. I've watched this delusion walk through the corridors of history, bankers in mahogany rooms convincing themselves that risk is diversified, young traders before glowing screens, believing volatility is just noise, homeowners stretching beyond their means because the neighbor did. Each generation invents new words to justify the same mistake. But the story never changes. Only the vocabulary does. Arrogance always begins with success. When the numbers rise, people start to believe they are the cause. They forget the role of chance, the mercy of timing, the quiet hand of luck. They call their fortune a formula and their speculation a system. And once belief hardens into certainty, ruin begins its slow walk. No one ever goes broke without owing someone. Debt is the quiet companion of collapse, always waiting in the corner, patient, precise, inevitable. It watches silently while confidence grows and steps forward only when reality demands payment. To believe oneself smarter than arithmetic is to juggle fire in a room full of gasoline. It looks impressive, for a while. The crowd applauds, the lights gleam, and the performer smiles with the pride of control. But the laws of nature do not negotiate. Eventually, one flame slips. And when it does, intelligence cannot extinguish what ego has ignited. I have seen it too many times to count. Brilliant minds, once celebrated, undone not by ignorance but by cleverness. They mistook intelligence for immunity. They believed knowledge could protect them from discipline, that brilliance could outpace the clockwork rhythm of interest compounding. But arithmetic is older than pride. It predates ambition, outlives empires, and humbles kings. In the end, the market does not reward intellect, it rewards survival. And survival requires humility, the rarest form of intelligence. The illusion of control is humanity's oldest addiction. It tempts every generation to believe it can improve upon simplicity, that through models, machines, and metrics, it can soften the sharp edges of consequence. But the truth is ancient and undefeated. You can borrow money, but not wisdom. You can leverage capital, but not time. And you can decorate your debt with brilliance, but in the end, the math will always have the final word. I have watched civilizations rise on the strength of their discipline and fall under the weight of their comfort. Every age begins with hunger and ends with appetite, not for food, but for more. And somewhere between survival and success, debt ceases to be a danger and becomes a doctrine. Once, owing was a scarlet mark, a sign of weakness, a failure to plan, a wound to pride. Now, it is a credential, a mortgage, a loan, a credit score, badges of participation in the modern faith. We no longer ask, "Do you owe?" We ask, "How much?" And those who owe the most often stand tallest in the temple. I call it a gospel because debt has become more than an instrument. It is a belief system. It promises salvation through consumption. It teaches that tomorrow will always arrive richer than today, and that progress justifies the borrowing of peace. Like all faiths, it thrives on hope. And like all delusions, it feeds on forgetting. The last crisis is always a ghost story, told around the fires of new prosperity. People remember the pain, but not the lesson. They recall the fear, but not the cause. And when comfort returns, humility is the first to vanish. I have seen this amnesia sweep through societies like a gentle fog. When the wounds of collapse fade, optimism reappears, smiling, well-dressed, confident. The bankers call it growth. The economists call it recovery. But I know it for what it is, the slow return of collective blindness. Debt, to me, is not merely arithmetic. It is psychology in disguise. It thrives on our hunger for immediacy, on our refusal to wait, on our belief that we can possess what we have not yet earned. It seduces with comfort and disguises itself as progress. The world mistakes access for abundance and credit for capability. And so, humanity trades freedom for the illusion of participation. In this gospel, patience is heresy. We are told that only the impatient succeed, that speed is intelligence and deferral is defeat. But the faster we move, the more invisible our chains become. Every borrowed dollar is a promise sold to the future, and the future, though silent, keeps impeccable records. I have watched nations borrow not to build, but to sustain illusion. They borrow to protect appearances, to convince their citizens, their investors, and themselves that stability has returned. They borrow until the numbers lose meaning, until currency itself becomes an act of faith. And when belief falters, collapse arrives like a sermon in reverse, not shouted, but whispered, as markets fall in quiet disbelief. Still, the gospel endures, because it is convenient, because it flatters human weakness, because it offers the dream of wealth without the discipline of patience, and because the memory of pain fades faster than the appetite for pleasure. I have seen this rhythm repeat through centuries: Egypt, Rome, London, New York, digital cities of the present. Each era begins with prudence and ends with pride. Each generation swears it will not repeat the mistakes of its ancestors, and each one, convinced of its own sophistication, finds a more elegant way to self-destruct. Debt is the quiet creed of civilization, the belief that tomorrow will forgive today. And perhaps, for a time, it does. But arithmetic is patient. It allows faith to flourish just long enough for lessons to be forgotten. Then it collects, quietly, precisely, without emotion. I have lived long enough to know the cost of debt is not measured in money, but in memory. A society that forgets its lessons must keep buying them again, at compound interest. And so, the gospel spreads, not through preaching, but through habit. From nations to families, from balance sheets to hearts. Until owing feels normal and freedom feels optional. Until debt is no longer seen as the price of desire, but as the proof of belonging. I have always been fascinated by how easily human beings rename their dangers. Give a risk a sophisticated name, and it becomes respectable. Wrap uncertainty in a spreadsheet, and it feels like control. When the gambler puts on a suit, the casino becomes a market, and luck disguises itself as skill. I have seen the same dance in every age. The tools change, the stage evolves, but the rhythm never falters. People reach for more than they can hold, and when the flames of fortune rise, they convince themselves they are in command of the fire. They call it strategy. They call it investment. They call it innovation. But in truth, it is the same game played under brighter lights. The ancient, fragile dance between arrogance and arithmetic. Risk, I've learned, is never what it appears to be. It is not the volatility you can see, but the fragility you cannot. It hides beneath confidence, disguised as competence. It thrives in prosperity, because prosperity breeds blindness. The more success one tastes, the duller their sense of danger becomes. It's a kind of intoxication, a slow, invisible drunkenness that convinces the player that the fire will obey them. They juggle faster, reach higher, take bigger bets. The crowd cheers, the screens flash green, and the illusion deepens. Then, one day, without warning, a flame slips. It always does. And when it does, the applause stops. Because the world never remembers the 1,000 moments when the juggler kept the fire aloft. Only the one when he didn't. I have seen fortunes vanish not through ignorance, but through momentum of success. People who thought they were winning were simply being carried upward by chance, and mistook the wind for wings. They were not investors. They were participants in a temporary alignment of luck. But when the wind changed, they called it unfair. They blamed markets, systems, policies, anything but the mirror. Mathematics, though, does not care for narratives. It does not reward confidence. It has no memory of your victories, no sympathy for your streaks. It only counts, and eventually it counts you. I have seen traders speak of diversification as if it were divine protection. But no equation can guard against ego. No model can forecast the moment when belief overtakes logic. Fragility begins not when risk increases, but when awareness of risk disappears. Every empire, every company, every fortune I've watched fall had one thing in common. They all mistook temporary stability for permanent safety. They thought consistency meant control, but control is a story we tell ourselves to keep fear at bay. The truth is simpler, colder. The universe runs on probability, not promises. To survive, one must respect the mathematics of ruin. You can win 100 times and lose only once, and still lose everything. The arithmetic of risk is cruel that way. It rewards restraint more than brilliance, and humility more than confidence. But humility is quiet. Confidence is loud. And in a world that celebrates noise, the quiet ones are ignored until the fire returns. I have seen people call their gambles investments because the alternative, admitting it's luck, feels unbearable. They prefer stories of mastery to the truth of fragility. They tell themselves they have systems, strategies, signals. But I have watched those systems crumble in an afternoon, their precision undone by a single event that refused to fit the model. What math knows and humans forget is that survival is never about being right. It is about not being wrong for too long. The market, like nature, does not punish mistakes. It punishes persistence in them. Emotion blinds, but arithmetic endures. I have come to trust numbers more than narratives. Emotion wants drama, victory and defeat, risk and reward. But math offers no such comfort. It simply says, you risked more than you could lose. You lost. Now learn. Those who survive are not the smartest. They are the ones who bow to probability, who respect fragility, who understand that every fire they juggle is temporary. They build lives that can withstand the drop, not just dazzle during the rise. And when I look back across the centuries, through the ashes of bubbles and the ruins of confidence, I see the same truth burning quietly beneath it all. It is not emotion that governs survival. It is arithmetic, eternal, unmerciful, and precise. Destruction does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, not as fire, but as weight. Debt rarely kills in drama. It prefers erosion. It seeps into the corners of the mind, changing the way a person breathes, thinks, and waits. I have seen men who could face storms tremble at the arrival of a small envelope, not because of what it contained, but because of what it reminded them, that they no longer owned their time. That is the true violence of owing, not the loss of money, but the surrender of peace. Debt does not just claim your future, it colonizes your present. It whispers as you sleep, counts as you rest, weighs every decision with invisible gravity. You begin to measure life not in days, but in due dates. At first, the numbers seem harmless, digits on a screen, promises on paper. The payments are small, the interest almost polite. And so you tell yourself it's manageable. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself everyone does it. But I've watched this story before. It begins with optimism and ends with apology. Debt is patient. It never rushes. It grows in silence, feeding on neglect, compounding quietly in the dark, like mold in a forgotten room. It thrives on distraction. It knows that as long as life feels busy, you won't notice how much of your freedom it has taken. You'll still laugh, still work, still dream. But behind every joy there will be a faint hum of pressure, a soft distortion in the frequency of your peace. I've seen that look. The one that hides behind polite smiles at dinner tables, behind the glow of new possessions. It's the look of someone carrying invisible chains. They've bought comfort, but traded serenity. Their possessions sparkle, but their patience has dimmed. Debt alters behavior long before it destroys balance sheets. It makes people hurry decisions, hurry dreams, hurry life itself. It robs them of the slow rhythm that wisdom requires. It replaces patience with panic and creativity with calculation. And slowly, without notice, life becomes an equation of survival. You start choosing not what's right, but what's urgent. You begin to see every opportunity through the lens of repayment. Even joy becomes transactional, something to be justified, not felt. I have met people who owed so much they could not rest, not because collectors knocked, but because silence itself became unbearable. They feared stillness, for in stillness they could hear the whispers of arithmetic calling their name. Debt speaks softly, but persistently. It does not scream like poverty. It murmurs like guilt. What fascinates me most is how quickly people learn to normalize it. They adapt to pressure as if it were weather, inconvenient but inevitable. Entire societies begin to orbit around the expectation of owing. Governments borrow to fund promises. Families borrow to imitate wealth. Students borrow to buy time. And each believes their debt is a bridge, never realizing it leads to the same shore of dependence. I have seen the strongest spirits bend beneath its quiet persistence, not broken, just diminished. A little less laughter, a little less patience, a little less sleep. Until one day, They look back and realize that the price of every borrowed comfort was the steady corrosion of peace. Debt is not merely a financial state, it is an emotional condition. It teaches fear in installments. It replaces curiosity with caution. It makes tomorrow feel heavier than today, and yet convinces you that more borrowing will lighten the load. But nothing built on pressure can last, and nothing born of impatience can bring peace. I have learned to recognize the quiet killer for what it is, not a villain in shadow, but a companion we invited in. It does not demand entry. It suggests convenience. It does not steal abruptly. It collects gracefully. And by the time we realize the cost, it has already taken the most valuable currency we ever had: time without fear. When I speak of freedom, I do not mean wealth. I mean the absence of that whisper. The silence that returns when nothing is owed, when mornings arrive without calculation. That is wealth, not measured in what you own, but in how lightly you can breathe. There are few forces in existence as fair, as merciless, and as misunderstood as compounding. It is the quiet law that governs both prosperity and ruin, the double-edged arithmetic that builds empires and buries them, depending only on which side of the equation you stand. I have watched compounding save the patient and destroy the impatient. It has no loyalty, no morality, no bias. It does not care whether you are a saint or a fool. It rewards consistency and punishes haste with equal precision. It is, in essence, the most honest force in the universe. When I speak of servitude, I do not mean chains and masters. I mean the invisible captivity of imbalance. To owe is to serve. To be owed is to rule. And the compounding of either is a self-reinforcing destiny. The disciplined become freer with time. The leveraged become prisoners of their own acceleration. Most people imagine freedom as acquisition: more money, more access, more things. But freedom, in its purest form, is subtraction. It is the gradual removal of dependence, the quiet unraveling of obligations until your time belongs entirely to you. The mathematics of servitude are simple. If your money works harder than you do, you are free. If you work harder than your money, you are not. I have seen men earn millions yet remain enslaved, not to a boss, but to their own leverage. They live in mansions built on credit and sleep beside anxieties that no luxury can quiet. They have everything but ownership. And ownership, I have learned, is not a title. It is the absence of debt. Compounding is often described as magic, but it is not magic. It is justice in slow motion. It amplifies whatever truth you feed it. Feed it patience, and it becomes abundance. Feed it recklessness, and it becomes ruin. It is not kind or cruel. It is exact. I have seen people treat it as a weapon of conquest, but compounding punishes arrogance. It rewards those who align with its rhythm, not those who attempt to accelerate it. You cannot rush a tree to grow, nor can you cheat the geometry of exponential truth. Every shortcut has a cost, and the bill always arrives with interest. What fascinates me most is how differently compounding feels depending on your position. For the debtor, it is suffocation. Interest accumulating like dust, turning every breath into labor. For the investor, it is liberation, growth that requires no effort, freedom that multiplies quietly while one sleeps. The same principle, the same arithmetic, two opposite lives. This symmetry is what gives compounding its beauty and its cruelty. It does not change according to hope. It only mirrors behavior. And that is why I call it the mathematics of servitude. Because it makes slaves of the impulsive and sovereigns of the patient. I have met people who chase high returns like gamblers, mistaking motion for progress. They crave acceleration, not understanding that velocity without direction leads only to exhaustion. They believe the secret of wealth lies in performance, when in truth, it lies in endurance. The compounding of small, consistent effort will always outlast the fireworks of ambition. Freedom, I have come to see, is not purchased, it is compounded. It grows in the space between discipline and restraint. It is built not by what you acquire, but by what you no longer need. The fewer obligations you have, the more options you possess. And the more options you possess, the closer you come to peace. There is a profound irony in how the modern world defines wealth. We celebrate those who have the most leverage, not those with the most autonomy. We admire the empire, not the solitude. But I have walked through both, the crowded corridors of excess and the quiet rooms of independence, and I know where true freedom lives. It is not in abundance, it is in enough. When compounding works for you, time becomes an ally. When it works against you, time becomes a predator. Both march at the same pace, only your direction differs. The disciplined harness it. The leveraged are devoured by it. That is the brutal symmetry I have come to respect. That the same clock which frees one man will enslave another. The same interest that grows a fortune will also quietly dismantle one. And in both cases, arithmetic does exactly what it was designed to do. It tells the truth without emotion. So I no longer chase more. I chase less. Fewer obligations. Fewer dependencies. Fewer reasons to hurry. Freedom, in the end, is not the ability to buy anything. It is the absence of anything that owns you. I have spent a lifetime observing the delicate architecture of prosperity and the even more precise mechanics of its collapse. If there is a single recurring pattern across centuries, it is the virus of leverage, the subtle pathogen that infects even the most disciplined minds. Leverage is seductive because it feels like intelligence. It promises more than what your hands can hold, faster than your patience can endure. It whispers of opportunity and disguises risk as sophistication. And like a virus, it spreads quietly, often before the host even knows it has been infected. Throughout history, I have watched brilliant men fall. They borrow to accelerate gains, confident that their calculations are sound. At first, it works. Their numbers shine, their confidence swells, and the world applauds their cleverness. They call themselves masters of risk. I call them patients of a virus they cannot see. Then, invariably, the environment changes. Interest rates rise, markets sneeze, one deal falters. And suddenly, the edifice of confidence cracks. I have seen fortunes vanish in a heartbeat, yet the arithmetic had been precise all along. Leverage magnifies outcomes, both good and bad, with absolute impartiality. A 10% decline in a leveraged portfolio can feel like 100%, a reminder that the mathematics of debt does not negotiate with hope. Consider the boom and bust cycles, from the Dutch tulip mania to the stock crashes of the 1920s, the housing excesses of the 2000s, and the speculative fervor of the dot-com era. The narrative is always the same. Innovation, insight, or intelligence lures investors into borrowing. For a moment, brilliance and luck dance together. Then reality calls the balance, and leverage turns the clever into beggars. I have watched those who avoided leverage look dull at first. Their returns were steady, unspectacular, unremarkable. Yet when the collapse arrived, they were the last standing. The world mocked them for their caution, and then envied them for their survival. They understood a timeless law. Prosperity is fragile when borrowed, resilient when owned. Leverage does not care for skill. It does not recognize wisdom. It obeys arithmetic and nothing else. Brains, experience, and foresight provide no immunity. The virus is democratic in its cruelty. It infects both the ambitious and the disciplined if they mistake borrowed power for true capability. I have often said, leverage is like fire. It can cook a meal or burn a house. The difference is not in the tool, but in the hands that wield it. And most hands, I have observed, are careless when seduced by immediate gain. The greatest danger of leverage is not visible until it is too late. It converts temporary advantage into permanent vulnerability. It transforms patience into panic. It replaces rational decision-making with desperation. The leveraged investor no longer thinks clearly. He reacts urgently. Opportunity becomes a threat. Volatility becomes terror. I have seen people justify leverage with low interest rates or modest ratios. They call it efficiency, optimization, capital allocation. I call it hope dressed in clever words. Because when the first real challenge arrives, the mask falls away. The house always collects its dues. Even those who survive leverage emerge changed. Confidence becomes caution. Ambition is tempered by fear. The memory of fragility lingers long after the market recovers. The virus leaves its scar, teaching that the cost of borrowed prosperity is often far higher than the returns it once promised. And yet, humanity repeats this cycle endlessly. Each generation believes it has discovered a smarter, safer leverage. Each generation forgets the lessons of its predecessors. The virus is patient. It thrives on amnesia and pride. I have come to understand leverage not as a tool, but as a test, a measure of humility. Those who pass it do so not by genius, but by restraint. Those who fail do so not because they are foolish, but because they are human. For the promise of borrowed power is irresistible, and the calculus of patience invisible. I have learned that true freedom cannot coexist with leverage. It is the absence of obligation that allows clarity of thought, endurance of action, and courage in the face of uncertainty. The leveraged man can never truly act freely. Every decision is constrained by the unseen hand of debt. Confidence becomes illusion. Prosperity, a fragile veneer. And so, I watch history like a patient physician, diagnosing the same condition in every era. It has no cure except avoidance. It has no warning except experience. And those who succumb pay the price with more than money. They pay with peace, patience, and the quiet dignity of autonomy. Leverage is a virus. It spreads with success, thrives on pride, and leaves devastation in its wake. And yet the antidote is simple. Live within your means, avoid unnecessary borrowing, and let time, patience, and compounding be your allies. It is neither glamorous nor fast, but it is the only path to enduring prosperity. I have always been fascinated by how intelligence can be mistaken for wisdom. The world of finance is particularly skilled at this deception. Complexity is revered. Jargon becomes armor. The more intricate the model, the more convincing the illusion of control. I have watched men construct elaborate spreadsheets, mapping every conceivable scenario, assigning probabilities, hedging risks, and measuring correlations. They call it sophistication. I call it intellectual theater, a stage where illusion parades as mastery. They believe that if they speak fluently about derivatives, leverage, and arbitrage, they have conquered uncertainty. But mathematics does not care for performance or rhetoric. Arithmetic does not applaud clever language or elegant diagrams. It counts, inexorably, relentlessly, in silence. And it never sleeps. I have seen brilliant minds fall into the trap of their own complexity. They assume that sophistication protects them from risk, when in truth it often hides it. The more complicated the strategy, the harder it becomes to see the single brutal truth. If you owe, compounding works against you. If you borrow to invest, you gamble, regardless of the words you use. If you rely on a model that fails to account for reality's chaos, you are blind to the danger beneath your feet. There is an irony in human nature. The smarter we are, the better we are at rationalizing our mistakes. We invent reasons to justify borrowed success, call it calculated risk, and convince ourselves we are clever. Yet the market, the economy, and the laws of arithmetic care nothing for cleverness. They respond only to facts. And facts, over time, have an impeccable memory. I have watched the smart over and over. They borrow at low rates, leverage their positions, and boast about efficiency. They sit in boardrooms, in offices with panoramic views, discussing innovation and strategy. They think they are invincible. Then, a slight disturbance occurs. Interest rates tick upward. A single investment falters. A margin call arrives. And the empire begins to crumble. The complexity that once gave them confidence becomes the very instrument of their downfall. They cannot pivot quickly, cannot see clearly through the dense forest of their own design. What they thought was sophistication was merely the elegant clothing of chaos. And chaos does not wear etiquette. It does not forgive brilliance or experience. It counts only mistakes, compounded with interest. I have also seen the other path. The quiet, patient simplicity. The people who avoid unnecessary debt, who invest methodically, who measure life by what they can sustain rather than what they can magnify. They appear dull to the crowd, slow, conservative, unspectacular. Yet when the storms arrive, they are the last standing. Their simplicity is their armor, their patience their strength. Simplicity is not absence of thought, but alignment with reality. It recognizes the power of arithmetic. It understands that compounding never hurries and never forgives. It respects patience as the rarest form of intelligence in investing. I have come to believe that true sophistication is the courage to do what is simple, even when the world celebrates spectacle. It is the wisdom to resist the siren call of leverage, of excitement, of borrowed power. It is the clarity to see that the world is unpredictable, and that humility, not cleverness, is the ultimate protection. Those who chase cleverness for its own sake, I have seen, pay dearly. They confuse complexity for security and motion for progress. They believe that intelligence alone can tame the wild arithmetic of debt and time. But arithmetic does not sleep. It does not negotiate. It does not care how sophisticated you appear. And so I watch, over decades, as generations perform the same theater. They call it financial innovation, strategic leverage, clever investing. I call it forgetting the simplest law. Debt compounds against you faster than any stock can compound for you. No amount of elegance changes that fact. In the end, the true mark of sophistication is quiet. It is not measured by portfolio reports or the applause of peers. It is measured in peace of mind, in decisions unhurried, in patience uninterrupted, in freedom unclaimed by obligation. Simplicity is not boring. It is survival, multiplied by time. It is clarity, compounded. It is the art of winning slowly, surely, and without illusion. I have spent decades observing the curious arithmetic of life. It is a paradox both simple and profound. The less you owe, the richer you become. Not in possessions, not in displays, but in the currency that matters most: autonomy, patience, and peace of mind. Wealth is often measured by what is visible: the cars, the houses, the numbers in a brokerage account. But I have learned that true wealth lies in what is invisible: the absence of obligation, the absence of a creditor's claim on your tomorrow, the absence of pressure to act before the time is right, the absence of fear masquerading as prudence. Debt compounds against you. It works silently, faithfully, and without bias. It whispers in the dark of the night and shapes your thoughts while you imagine freedom. Every dollar you owe is a dollar that cannot serve your future. Every month spent paying interest is a month stolen from the compounding of independence. I have seen the richest-looking people live with a poverty of choice. They work harder than anyone else, yet every effort flows to someone else. Every long hour, every sleepless night, every clever investment made under leverage, none of it compounds for them. It compounds for the bank, the lender, the collector. And the irony is exquisite. The more they chase wealth, the more their freedom shrinks. On the other hand, those who own nothing experience a quiet, invisible accrual of power. They wake each morning not to a ledger, but to a life unconstrained. Every decision is theirs alone. Every opportunity can be seized without compromise. Time, patience, and judgment compound exponentially when unburdened by debt. This is the paradox. Independence compounds faster than interest rates. A single month without obligation may seem small, but over years and decades, the effect is enormous. The freedom to wait, the freedom to choose wisely, the freedom to act without desperation. These are assets no market can provide, no advisor can sell, no risk can replace. I have often told young investors, wealth is not a sprint. It is a condition cultivated over decades through discipline, restraint, and the removal of distractions. And the greatest distraction of all is debt. I remember advising a student once, torn between paying off student loans and investing in the market. He imagined that compounding returns could outpace his obligations. I told him the arithmetic does not care about imagination. Debt compounds daily. Market returns compound irregularly. The one guaranteed to work against you always does. The one promised to work for you is uncertain, unpredictable. When you owe, you are already behind, regardless of your portfolio's sophistication. Independence, on the other hand, compounds effortlessly. Every dollar freed from obligation is a seed for future growth. Every month without a creditor's claim strengthens your judgment, enhances your patience, and enlarges your capacity to endure uncertainty. It teaches you the rarest skill in finance, the ability to wait. Waiting is the quiet power behind every fortune I have ever admired. Patience, not action, separates those who survive from those who perish. Debt steals patience. It replaces the long view with urgency, the calm assessment with panic, the rational plan with desperation. And once patience is lost, opportunity becomes misfortune disguised. I have watched the paradox play out across generations. Those who chase visible wealth through borrowed means falter at every turn. Those who cultivate invisible wealth through restraint and independence rise quietly, steadily, imperceptibly, until one day they are seen as extraordinary, even brilliant. Yet their brilliance is not in cleverness or speed, but in the uninterrupted compounding of freedom. In the end, the paradox is simple. The path to richness is not accumulation alone, but subtraction. Not more leverage, more risk, more motion, but less owing, less urgency, less compromise. Every obligation removed multiplies the value of every present and future decision. Every creditor released grants you a form of interest no market can replicate, the compounding of choice. I have learned that true wealth is measured not by numbers, but by liberty. It is the capacity to sleep without worry, to wait without fear, and to act without coercion. It is the freedom to ignore the crowd, the panic, the noise, because no one else owns your next move. And that, I have discovered, is the most powerful compounding force of all. Independence, nurtured patiently over a lifetime, outpaces every return, outlasts every boom and bust, and endures when every market collapses. The paradox of wealth is therefore clear. To gain more, owe less. To own more, relinquish nothing that diminishes your freedom. To build, first remove the chains, and in that liberation, the richest fortune of all begins, not in numbers, but in the quiet compounding of autonomy. I have come to see life and wealth as a long game, a marathon rather than a sprint, a patient accumulation rather than a feverish chase. The world is obsessed with speed, with immediate gratification, with the illusion of brilliance delivered overnight. But I have watched repeatedly how the slow and steady endure, while the swift and flashy perish. Fast money is seductive. It promises glamour, status, excitement. It whispers of cleverness, innovation, and mastery. It makes the heart race, the ego soar, and the mind believe it is in control. And yet, almost without fail, fast money is fleeting. I have observed countless cycles of boom and bust, each with its own cohort of believers in speed. The levered investor, the speculator, the frantic trader. They all share a common flaw: impatience. They seek accelerated returns, shortcutting the methodical work that forms the foundation of enduring wealth. And in doing so, they place themselves at the mercy of forces far larger than their cleverness. Markets, interest rates, chance. Boring wealth, on the other hand, is invisible in its early years. It does not make headlines. It does not impress peers. It does not offer instant applause. Yet it compounds quietly, like a river carving a canyon over centuries. I have learned that patience is not passive. It is a rare form of intelligence. It is the ability to wait for opportunity without being forced to act. It is the discipline to maintain composure when the world panics. It is the understanding that compounding, whether of money, of knowledge, or of experience, cannot be rushed. Those who endure longest are not necessarily smarter. They are not always the boldest. They are the calmest, the most disciplined, the ones who avoid unnecessary risk and embrace the slow accrual of advantage. History rewards endurance, and in hindsight, the patient always appear brilliant. Not because they were lucky, though luck may bless them, but because they survived long enough to let compounding work. I have seen young investors struggle with the desire to accelerate. They want to be wealthy now, to show results now, to feel progress now. They borrow, leverage, speculate, and in doing so, they forfeit the greatest asset they could ever possess: time. Time is the raw material of compounding, and when it is wasted, no cleverness can reclaim it. Boring wealth may be slow, but it is enduring. It withstands recessions, collapses, and crises. It survives human folly and institutional failures. It endures when markets crash, when interest rates rise, when bubbles burst. And those who have cultivated it silently reap the rewards, long after the frantic have been washed away. I have always contrasted leverage and patience in my observations. Leverage magnifies not only gains, but fragility. It shortens the leash of survival. It forces action under duress, turning careful judgment into desperation. Patience, by contrast, lengthens the leash. It provides room to maneuver, time to observe, and space to think. The paradox is striking. Those who appear to be slow, conservative, and cautious often end up far ahead of those who appear daring and clever. Endurance, a quiet, unglamorous virtue, compounds into results that seem miraculous only because they were built without drama. In the long game, stability outperforms brilliance. Restraint outlasts audacity. Consistency triumphs over cleverness. I have told young men and women, do not mistake motion for progress. Do not confuse activity with achievement. The market will not reward your urgency. The world does not honor your speed. The universe favors those who endure, who wait, who compound advantage quietly over decades. It is why the so-called geniuses in hindsight often look ordinary during their ascent. They avoided the traps of leverage, panic, and impatience. They built slowly, deliberately, and methodically. And when the storms of life arrived, as they always do, they were the last ones standing, the calm in the eye of chaos. I have observed countless stories where those who chased fast money were humbled, humiliated, or wiped out. And the patient? They merely continued, quietly, methodically, like a river that carves stone with persistence rather than fury. By the time anyone notices them, it appears effortless, it appears brilliant, and yet, it is neither luck nor genius. It is endurance compounded over time. In the long game, patience is not just a virtue. It is a strategy. It is the ultimate competitive advantage. It allows one to ignore noise, resist temptation, and act only when the conditions are right. It transforms the invisible work of decades into visible, undeniable wealth. And so, I have concluded that the secret to lasting success is neither speed nor sophistication, but longevity and restraint. The ones who endure are not chasing brilliance, they are cultivating it silently through patience. They understand the paradox. Slow wealth looks boring, yet it survives and thrives where fast money collapses. The long game does not reward impulsiveness. It rewards wisdom, consistency, and freedom from obligation. Those who play it well are quiet, almost invisible, until the world finally catches up to their patience. And when it does, what appeared ordinary for decades is revealed to be extraordinary. Boring wealth is the path of the enduring. Fast money is the playground of the short-lived. And in the end, I have observed, those who survive the longest, the true winners, always look like geniuses in hindsight, because they respected time, avoided leverage, and embraced patience above all else. I have spent my life watching numbers move, markets fluctuate, and people chase illusions. And after nearly a century of observation, I have come to a singular truth. The ultimate wealth is not counted in dollars, but in ownership. Not the ownership of things, but the ownership of one's own time, decisions, and peace of mind. When you own nothing, you awaken to a silence few ever experience. It is not the absence of activity, but the absence of coercion. It is the absence of urgency imposed by another's claim on your future. The mind is calm. Judgment is clear. Patience becomes a natural rhythm rather than a forced exercise. I have seen people with vast portfolios tremble at small market shifts, haunted by obligations they cannot escape. I have seen brilliant investors forced to act against their judgment because creditors demanded their attention. Leverage transforms freedom into servitude, curiosity into caution, and opportunity into desperation. Arithmetic, when obeyed, does not merely govern finances. It teaches philosophy. It whispers that no shortcut compensates for time. It reminds us that compounding works only when uninterrupted. It instructs that every obligation diminishes the power of the present and erodes the promise of the future. To own nothing but one's mind is to possess everything. Freedom is not flashy. It does not announce itself. It does not require validation or admiration, but it compounds invisibly, steadily, inexorably, in the background of life. I have taught and I have observed that every dollar freed from debt is a declaration of independence. Every obligation removed is a step closer to true control. Every month spent without a lender's claim strengthens not your bank account, but your capacity to endure, to think, and to act without fear. I have learned to measure wealth not by accumulation, but by liberation. Not by how much one earns, but by how little one owes. The silence of ownership is profound. It allows time to stretch, patience to deepen, and judgment to flourish. It is in this silence that the compounding of wisdom occurs. It is in this silence that the greatest victories are achieved, not loudly, but invisibly. Freedom, I have found, is the ultimate return on investment. It compounds without interruption. It cannot be taxed by interest. It cannot be erased by market volatility. It is perennial. And so I end where I began, with arithmetic transformed into philosophy. Debt, interest, compounding. They are not merely financial instruments, they are teachers. They instruct us that security is built not through cleverness, speed, or risk, but through discipline, patience, and the absence of obligation. To live debt-free is to live in command of one's own life. To owe nothing is to hear the quiet mind speak, unencumbered by the demands of others. It is to act from clarity, not desperation. It is to invest not for survival, but for choice. It is to let time, the truest partner, do its work. I have watched generations chase illusion after illusion, seeking brilliance in borrowed power. And I have seen the patient, the disciplined, and the free quietly rise above them all. Not because they are smarter, but because they are unchained. Not because they are faster, but because they endure. Not because they are louder, but because they own their silence. And that silence, profound and unbroken, is the greatest wealth I have ever known. Not in dollars, not in status, but in the simple, inexhaustible, irreplaceable power of owning one's own life. Arithmetic, in its cold, unyielding precision, becomes philosophy. It teaches that true richness comes not from what we gain, but from what we owe nothing at all. And when we achieve that, we have already won the only game worth playing.